Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Beach Read. I love this book. This book, I don't know, it just made me happy. Like every chapter I finished, I felt like I thought about something but also was like, oh, I'm happy. And I didn't really expect that from it. I had read reviews ahead of time and a lot of the reviews did say, you know, it's a romance but it's got a little bit of something extra. It talks about some other topics, so it was really good. And lots of people give it 5 stars, and I have to agree. I think I would also give it 5 stars just because it made me feel really nice. I really haven't read a lot of romance, apart from maybe like young adult romance, and I thought this book was like an excellent way into romance. I almost feel like it's maybe set the bar a little bit too high, and now other romances I read are going to disappoint me, but I'm not sure. All I know is I just had a really good time with it. So let's get into why I felt that way. Let's start with the romance, because it is a romance book and that is kind of the central focus, even though this book did have a lot of other focuses too. The romance was really sweet. There was some sex in this book, but it wasn't overly graphic or overly smutty, which I like. I don't really like a lot of smut. They built up a lot of romantic tension throughout the novel, and it had a really good payoff as a result. I really like the chapters of them spending time together and going on these pseudo dates or going on these interviews. And there was lots of really sweet little intimate moments, like when they're talking at dinner and their interviewee hasn't shown up and they're sort of touching hands under the table but not really addressing it like explicitly, but they both know what's going on and they're making eye contact. Love that shit. So cute. By the way, I'm going to be doing spoilers, so go watch something else if you don't want to know what happens. Obviously it's a romance, it's got that structure of happily for now or happy ever after at the end, so I'm not really spoiling that there is a romance, but I'm going to get a bit more deeper into the themes now, so thanks for watching. I would recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. If you like romance, read it. If you don't like romance, maybe give it a try, but if it's still not for you, then that's fine. Okay, bye. Now that they're gone, let's get into some of the deeper themes. Now I see deeper themes, this isn't like the most deep book you will ever read by any means. I'm not gonna say that about it, but it does give a little bit something more that I wasn't expecting. So in this book, the main character January talks a lot about why she writes women's fiction, why she writes romance, and how it's kind of an escape for her. She talks about this really perfect romance between her parents and how that informed a lot of her worldview. But her father, at the beginning of this novel, has just died, and she's found out that he's had a secret mistress this whole time in this whole secret second house that she's now inherited. Her mother's also suffered from cancer 3 times, so this affair was going on while her mother suffered from cancer, which was very traumatic for January. I think looking at January and her idealism and her escapism through this lens of traumatic stuff happening at home with her mother, it really makes sense, and it's a really common way that people psychologically deal with that kind of stress. All of us here watching this video like books, and that's part of why we like books. It gives us a little escape, makes us think about our lives as well sometimes, but books like romance books typically give you that escape when you're going through a stressful experience at home. And this is a real common human urge, and it can really become a problem for people. And I'm no exception to that. I felt very drawn into fantasy as well as an escape from life's challenges. And so reading this book really made me think about that and think about stresses that I was going through while I was reading this book as well in my own life. It gave me that nice romantic escapism whilst I was still able to process the stresses and the problems because the book addressed that, and I thought that made the book really special, honestly. The theme of this book is kind of about real versus imagined people as well. You know, at the start of the book, she has this really warped view of Gus and who he is because she knew him at university and seen him as a rival. She always kind of felt that he scorned her love of writing romance and happy endings, but really he was just dealing with trouble at home himself, and he was interested in how she had that worldview. And her own defensiveness of herself and of her genre really made her create this false idea of of who Gus was. So when she meets him again at the beginning of this novel, she is quite a little bit hostile towards him. She's not that warm, and it takes some time for her to break down these barriers. The whole premise of the novel is that he writes literary fiction and she writes romance, and they swap genres because they've both got deadlines at the end of the summer. And she sees it as this kind of, I'm going to prove to you that writing romance is not as easy as it looks, and that it can be meaningful and it can be all of these other things. But she's battling with this fake idea of Gus, and Gus never really felt that to begin with. He was never actually being a pretentious literary fiction grumpy guy. There's also the real and imagined idea of her parents and their relationship. You know, she sees this ideal version of their perfect romantic relationship and their perfect love story, but the reality was way more complex. But actually, that doesn't mean they didn't have a good relationship at times, and she needn't have such a black and white view of their relationship. I've seen some critiques saying like January's maybe reading as a bit of a younger character, like she's a little bit naive in this sense, and that what age is she, like 28, 29, is a little bit late to be coming to these ideas. But I don't think so. I think things that we fall into, patterns that we fall into as children or as young adults, can stay with us to adulthood, and sometimes it takes grief or another kind of traumatic incident for our attention to be really drawn to that, or to finally address that in therapy or whatever, through a relationship maybe. And I don't think we should shame her for being 28 and struggling with this real versus imagined people, this dreamlike fantasy view of the world. You know, she says herself that her mum had cancer while she was at uni and while she was, 21, 22. So it makes sense that she wouldn't grow out of that tendency. Some of us don't grow out of that tendency for a little while and can need a little bit of extra help. And finally in this novel, she's learning these lessons and she is maturing and developing, and that's great. Grief is something that is also a major theme of this book, and it's grief about her dad, but also Gus grieving his broken marriage as well. And slowly over the course of the novel, they open up to each other about these things, and they can support each other with their grief as well. So these are all quite heavy themes that you wouldn't expect to find in a beach read as such. And that's why it surprised me. It surprised a lot of people, and I really enjoyed it. I also love it because one of the major themes is about writing, and it talks about writing a lot. She defends women's fiction a lot. There's no men's fiction. And she defends the romance genre as well, which might be Emily Henry kind of defending herself and justifying her own books, but it also is clever because the kind of people that would pick up this book called Beach Read that looks like that with this colourful cover are the kind of people that enjoy romances and the kind of people that enjoy beach reads. And so it kind of rubs your ego as you read it, because you're like, yes, see, I'm not reading a silly romance. I'm perfectly justified and happy and entitled to do so. So that validation does make it more likely that you're going to pick up another romance book, especially another Emily Henry book. So I think that was quite clever, even though she did justify it a lot. But like I've said before, she's doing that because she feels defensive, the character feels defensive, and she imagines that other people are scorning her when actually they're not really. Well, at least Gus is not. They talk about blending romance and literary fiction, which is perfect. That's the kind of book I want to read. I like literary fiction, but if I have a romance, I want there to be some literary elements. I want there to be a little bit something more like this book gave. But it still isn't a literary book. The technical writing was good. I didn't see too many problems with it. It was quite a chatty style. There was a lot of brackets, parentheses, with extra information, which reads to kind of January's chatty voice. I've not read any other Emily Henry books, so we'll see if it's an Emily thing or a January thing. But there was just a couple of times where I found it a bit much and felt like she could just edit down the language a little. But otherwise it was perfectly fine. It did the job. It wasn't overly literary. It was easy to read, but it wasn't overly basic either. Writing doesn't always have to be flowery. In fact, good writing is simple and it conveys a message. It conveys the image that you want to portray. And this book does that, so it's good, that's fine. I enjoyed the plot. I liked the fake dates to kind of teach him about writing a romance, but I also liked all of the cult stuff. Didn't expect there to be a lot of cult stuff in a beach read, in a book called Beach Read. But they talked a lot about this cult that Gus was writing about, and they were interviewing people for, and they hit on some deeper themes on trauma and stuff like that through these chapters as well. And I think that helped deepen the relationship as well, you know, because these are quite intimate conversations, and Gus and January feel like they've shared in an experience. A few negatives with the plot that are just tropey to romance. After they finally hook up, Gus receives a phone call pretty much straight away while they're still lying there, and he gets up to answer it, and then he comes back and he's all weird and they have to go, and then they go to this party and then he's really weird and avoiding her and just not communicating. And I really hate that trope because it's not realistic to me. I feel like it's just something thrown in to give a little bit of conflict and a little bit of like, oh, what's happening? Is it all going to not work out? But because it's a romance, and it would be really shit if it didn't, you know it is going to work out, so it just feels really contrived. I just feel like in that situation in real life, if that happened and you really valued the person that you were with, you would say, oh hey, my ex just called, feeling a bit weird about it, I just need a bit of space to deal with this, but I'll see you on this day or at this time, like we'll come back, we'll talk about it. You would affirm like your attraction, your feelings, like really into this, you know, I really value this, I really value you, I just have to deal with this for a minute. That's what you would say. And you wouldn't just be weird, you would say like, oh hey, something's going on with me, I'm just feeling a bit off, nothing to do with you at all, like I just need a bit of a day to figure it out and have a think, not about our relationship but about what I'm going to do about this divorce, but I'll see you tomorrow, we'll get coffee, and like it's all good, I love you, it's all good, don't panic. There's nothing worse than like when people go hot and cold on you, or go, we need to talk, or oh, I'm just not sure about things but I can't talk about it right now. It just puts you into a bit of a, not traumatic space, but a bit of a negative reinforcement space of like panic and insecurity. And yeah, that's kind of how like fuckboys make you crazy, is by playing these like little games. And I don't think Gus was playing a game, and I think Gus is a good guy, so I think it's out of character for him to do that. He also kind of disappears halfway through the novel, for a week or so, and obviously like he's just going through some stuff, but it really makes her feel insecure. And like he could literally just shoot her a text and say like, oh, I'm out of town by the way, make up a lie, just don't leave her with nothing. And I get it's because he doesn't have a healthy way of dealing with this, and it's like his own kind of intimacy issues. But I know not everyone is perfect, right? Not everyone has perfect communication, but you're supposed to be adults, and I just think that's how adults communicate. I know a lot of adults don't communicate that way because I watch reality TV like Love is Blind and Maths, and these issues do come up with real couples constantly. But it annoys me. It annoys me in reality TV too, honestly. You just want to take someone, shake them and go, just use your words. So yeah, that's the only frustrating thing. And it's not a good frustration for me. It's like a, I hate people sometimes kind of frustration. Also, and I'm just looking at my notebook, if I look down it's because I'm looking at my notes, they drink drive a lot. They will literally go out and have like 3 or 4 drinks, like cocktails, and then they'll go, okay, well I'll just go for a coffee to sober up and then go home. And like, I don't know if anyone else learned this in school, but the only thing that sobers you up is time. And I don't know what the law is in America, but in England you can have like 2 units in drive, and in Scotland you just have 0 units in drive. So for me, maybe it's cultural, I'm just like, stop drinking and driving. And it wasn't one time, it was like multiple times. And she doesn't drive home from the book club because she's too drunk. Gus drives her home, but he's still had a White Russian or 2 as well. So it's just a little bit of a pet peeve, because like drunk driving isn't cool, guys. And like having a coffee doesn't outdo 4 cocktails. I'm sorry. Now let's talk about the characters. I like the characters, But some other reviewer that I watched said they've very much come across as like fictional people, and now that they've said that, I really can't not think about that. Like, they do January Andrews, Gus Everett, like those are such like fictional names. And some of the dialogue and the things they talk about, even the whole premise of the novel and their little fake dates and stuff, it is very fictional, but I think that's fine. It is a fictional novel after all, and I don't think that makes it a bad novel. Someone else that does this that I love dearly is John Green. His characters are always quite obviously fictional. Alaska, Hazel Grace Lancaster, Augustus, another Augustus. The kind of things they say, the kind of things that happen, the dialogue. People always say real teenagers don't sound like that. But that's because dialogue isn't supposed to sound the way real people talk. Book dialogue is supposed to drive the plot and the themes of the novel. It's supposed to explore themes. And you know, if characters like January or like Augustus Waters in The Fault in Our Stars come across as a bit naive with their dialogue or a bit idealistic, that's because they are idealistic. Some of the characters in John Green's novels, particularly the first three, they imagine the female protagonist or the female character as this manic pixie dream girl, as this fictionalized kind of girl, because they aren't imagining them complexly. And that is what January does to Gus in this novel. So the themes are fairly similar, and that's why this sense of fictionality comes across, because January is a little bit going into fantasy, as is her own neuroticism. And it takes her some time to get out of that. So I'm not saying that criticism is wrong, but I'm defending and explaining why that is the case. And setting wise, it was a good setup, but very little beach, which everyone else seems to agree with. They went to the beach once, she cried on the beach, that's it. So I think a bit more beach would have been good. The marketing of this novel was excellent. The covers of these novels, they're just so pretty, so colourful, such a vibe, perfect for on the beach. Really enjoyed sitting it in the sand at the beach and taking pictures and videos of it with the sea and the sunset. It looks perfect. Beach read is a very searchable term, so is like book lovers, me and you on vacation. So Emily Henry has really tapped this algorithmic searchable name in order to get people to buy her books. It's not like old romance novels where you would have kind of photorealistic people on the cover embracing or kissing that makes it look like a weird erotica. It's nice and contemporary, it's nice and graphic, it's nice and colourful. But, you know, something to note is I was reading this book, carrying it around in London with my friends who didn't read much romance, and they kind of looked at it and went, oh, look at the cover. I had book lovers with me as well because I was going to start reading that, didn't end up starting it. But they just looked at the covers and they're like, they look the same. They look so fluffy, they look like silly books. So that is the one downside. I like the covers, but clearly other people that had a bit of a misconception, or maybe not misconception, but an idea about romance, looked at them and went, no. Which I think was my initial impression, seeing them in Waterstones or W.H. Smith. I was like, I didn't take the book seriously. And it's actually only because they came up so constantly on TikTok and BookTube and books like that. Just the exposure alone made me start to be intrigued. I started to really like the cover, and that's ultimately why I picked it up in the end. So it did wear me down, and I'm glad that it did, because I had a lovely time reading this book. So I'm giving this book 5 stars for what it is. I think, you know, you can't judge every book by the same scale. Like, you can't judge a fish by the ability to climb trees. You can't judge a romance because it wasn't literary enough, and vice versa. You can't judge a literary novel because there wasn't enough fluff in it, for example. So for what it is, it does that very well, and it goes above and beyond, with only a tiny couple of shortcomings. And I'll definitely be picking up more of Emily Henry's books. I've got Book Lovers in my TBR, although I've heard more mixed feedback about that one, so we'll see if I like it. And I think this book just really scratches an itch. It really scratched an itch for me at the time I picked it up. I was going through some like more heavy stuff in the real world. I was quite busy, I was quite overwhelmed, even with just good things. So picking up quite a light book that still help me process my emotions and make me think about some sad stuff as well. It did really help me, and I kind of took something away from every chapter and also finished every chapter near enough like grinning and like, oh, that was so good, I wonder what's going to happen next. So I really loved it, and I think I would reread it, and for that reason it's a 5-star for me, because it just perfectly got it. It got the romance with a bit of something extra, and I loved it. So if you want to hear more reviews from me and other kind of videos, subscribe, like, comment, let me know what you thought of Beach Read, and tune in for my next video. See you later!